According to the American Medical Association Diagnostic and Treatment Guidelines on Domestic Violence is categorized as a pattern of coercive behaviors that may include repeated battering and injury, psychological abuse, sexual assault, progressive social isolation, deprivation, and intimidation. These behaviors are perpetrated by someone who is or was involved in an intimate relationship with the victim. The medical definition of domestic violence might differ from the legal one, but I will address that more at a later time. For the purpose of this, I will be focusing on the medical definition. Further, according to Donald G. Dutton and Kenneth Corvo, violence between intimates and family members stems from a complex of etiological processes with neurological, psychological, interpersonal, situational, and cultural influences. The etiology of intimate partner violence has been found to have long-term development stemming from early family influences such as witnessed violence, shaming, and trauma. So the abuse looks to be a chain that is difficult to break. A child who grows up in a home where there is domestic violence, high conflict, bullying and intimidation, coercion and manipulation, lying and deceit, might believe it to be normal and the average family dynamic and repeat the conduct. Children raised in violent homes may be at increased risk for perpetrating or experiencing violence in adulthood. But not all abusive partners or abused women were exposed to family violence while growing up. So why talk about such a topic? I believe there are many women and men who experience abuse on a daily basis. Most suffer in silence because the behavior is not only difficult to describe to others who have never experienced it themselves, but also, if the abuser finds out, could cause repercussions such as the offender slandering the victim and claiming to be the injured party him or herself. It is not unusual for the perpetrator to insist he or she is the receiver rather than the inflictor of the abuse. Further, the victim is or feels, time and again, not wholly believed. The abuse is either so severe or a seemingly unimaginable trait of the abuser. A victim receives responses of, "Are you sure you're not overreacting?" Or, "If it's so bad, why don't you leave?" Or, "Really? I can't believe he would act that way," or any other variation of doubt and disbelief, instead of support and help she desperately needs. Other reasons for not mentioning abuse include fear that revelation will jeopardize her safety, shame and humiliation at the way she is being treated, thinking she deserved the abuse and is not deserving of help, feeling protective of her partner. He may be her sole source of love and affection when he is not abusive and may provide the financial support for her and her children. Lack of awareness that her physical symptoms are caused by the stress of living in an abusive relationship, and belief that her injuries are not severe enough to mention. Because the experience of abuse is so degrading and humiliating, a woman may be reluctant to discuss it with someone who may not take her seriously, who may discount her experience, who may perceive her as deserving the abuse, or who may blame her for staying with her abuser. She may fear that reporting the abuse will jeopardize her safety and destroy her means of support. She may stay in the relationship hoping that the situation will get better. Her partner may not always be abusive, and this gives her hope that he will change. Further, the abused might get advice to stay in the marriage despite the terrible, unhealthy, unsafe treatment she or he is receiving. Regarding such advice, Fran Danis states, abused women have reported that professionals often put them in a double bind by blaming them for either not wanting to stay and solve problems in their marriage, or remaining in their abusive marriages without having personal or community resources to help them leave. These professionals often conveyed the message that violence is a normal part of marriage and should be accepted as such. Primary importance was placed on keeping the marriage together at all cost for the sake of the children. Victims need to know they are not alone. Conservative studies indicate that 2 million women per year are assaulted by partners, and national experts agree that the true incidence of partner violence is at least twice that figure. In fact, domestic violence has become so common that in major cities, entire prosecutorial and law enforcement teams have been established just to deal with domestic violence cases. And while we're touching on the legal side of domestic violence, it is oversimplistic to say of an abused woman, why doesn't she just leave the man? In many cases, the woman is financially dependent on the man. There may also be children involved. The abuser sometimes threatens to kill the woman and her children if she leaves. In some cases, the abused woman also suffers from low self-esteem and doesn't believe that she warrants any better relationship. Sometimes the woman believes that she can help the man work through his problems and stop the violence. In most situations, evidence shows that the violence continues to escalate over time until the woman is seriously injured or manages to get free of the relationship. I have found it is not uncommon for many people to associate domestic violence with only physical abuse. It is, however, much more than that, as will be described in this piece. Being, I believe, physical abuse to be often highlighted, I'm going to bypass that one and begin with psychological abuse. Melanie Shepard and James Campbell make an excellent point when stating, psychological abuse may occur where there is no history of physical abuse, but clinical experience suggests that physical abuse does not occur without psychological abuse. Initial data suggests that physical abuse is more likely to be eliminated after intervention than psychological abuse. Although physical abuse may have ceased, battered women may still be faced with ongoing psychological abuse that leads them to believe that physical abuse may recur. Graham, Rawlings, and Ramini state that victimizers of battered women assert control and guarantee submission by threats of violence, which do sometimes end in death. Melanie Shepard and James Campbell also broke down elements of psychological abuse into categories. They stated 20 psychological abuse items were drawn from the subcategories: emotional abuse, which included humiliation and degradation; isolation, which included restriction of social contact; intimidation, which included frighten with actions or gestures; threats, which included of harm to self or others; use of male privilege, which included compliance demanded based on belief of male entitlement; and economic abuse, restriction of financial resources. Looking at these individually sheds a little more light on tactics used by an abuser that can be considered psychological abuse. As one of their discussion items after their data collection, Shepard and Campbell state, "It is evident from the data that women report higher rates of abuse than do men, which has been documented in other studies. The results suggest, as do these studies and numerous clinical reports, that men minimize and deny the extent of their abusive behavior, a trait that may be common in relationships where narcissistic personality disorder and or borderline personality disorder, to name a couple, are factors." Like physical abuse, sexual abuse is also a form of domestic violence that is more well known and discussed. Therefore, I will skip over that one also and address progressive social isolation, deprivation, and intimidation. Social isolation seems to have at least two parts. One is the abuser forbidding the abused individual from being social and or controlling the social interactions of the abused. The second, as Margot Brenton explains, involves privacy or keeping the abuser secret. Brenton's remarks are based on the book Understanding Abusive Families, by James Garbarino and Gwen Gilliam. It focuses on child abuse, however, there are aspects which apply to domestic violence as a whole. Brenton states, social isolation is seen as the price paid for valuing privacy above the essential support system functions of feedback and nurturance. It is well known that the balance between stresses and supports is critical in the matter of child mistreatment. The writers postulate that society has its finger on the scale and may tip the balance over on the stress side through its insistence on autonomy, independence, and privacy. Families who deal with an abusive member who affects the entire household are in dire need of support, encouragement, protection, and nurturing from their community. Social isolation is one way an abuser continues to get away with harming his or her family. In his book, A Typology of Domestic Violence, Michael P. Johnson uses the term intimate terrorism. He states, an intimate terrorist is violent and highly controlling by definition. Intimate terrorism is about violent, coercive control. The intimate terrorist uses physical violence in combination with a variety of other control tactics to exercise general, coercive control over his partner. This powerful combination of violence with a general pattern of control is terrorizing because once a controlling partner has been violent, all of his other controlling actions take on the threat of violence. A look, a yell, a quiet warning, even an ostensibly benign request can have the emotional impact of a physical assault. Catherine Kirkwood describes it like this: the women's description of waiting for an attack, wondering about the intensity, searching their experience and resources for a method of diffusing the potential violence, all constitute a type of mental and emotional torture, and in fact their partner's behavior has been linked to the behavior of captors who emotionally torture prisoners of war. He includes a list of nonviolent control tactics, including threats and intimidation, monitoring, undermining the will to resist, such as beatings and other punishment in reaction to any real or imagined resistance, and with constant psychological attacks designed to destroy her self-confidence and convince her that she has no viable alternatives to this relationship, undermining the ability to resist, such as may not allow his partner to work, or if she does, she may have to hand over every paycheck from which he gives her just enough allowance to cover household expenses, and she may be required to account for every penny. One of the most important resources is other people who might help the partner understand what is happening to her, encourage her to resist or leave, or even offer financial and logistical support. This is an illustration of the power and control wheel. Although some women are successful in escaping a violent relationship after the first assault, most abuse is recurrent and escalates in both frequency and severity. In addition, a woman's independence may be compromised by her partner's need to dominate her and control many aspects of her life. He may restrict her access to food, clothing, money, friends, transportation, healthcare, social services, or employment. As I hope has been shown here, domestic violence is significantly more than just physical abuse. An abuser infiltrates the mind, body, and soul of those he or she aims to control. Further, it takes a village to save the family of an abuser who rules by domestic violence.